So I just wanted to thank the Humanist community for inviting me here today to speak on this topic. And of course, the news that we have had very recently, of course, changes everything. It changes the whole way that introduction would have been written, because, as you all know, it's this suddenly, just last week, we have President Trump announcing that he will accept the invitation of the North Korea to actually visit and have a face-to-face meeting with President Kim Jong-un of North Korea. And no president in history, U.S. president, has ever had a face-to-face meeting, let alone has not even had a phone call with a North Korean leader. So this is really a breakthrough. It's a breakthrough that is on the order of magnitude of Nixon's decision to go to China and recognize China back in 1970, 72 or 3. So things have, and this is in the face of an exchange of nuclear threats between North Korea and the U.S. government just within the last few months. So things have become very interesting and unpredictable. But in order to understand what's going on here, in order to understand and to break through the shroud of disinformation that has been going on for so long, we need to understand what North Korea is about. We need to understand, what their real intentions are. We need to understand what their policies have been. What have they been saying? Much of which the U.S. media and the Western media have not reported all these years. And a lot of the depiction of what is going on here is sort of this madness, right? This madness between two leaders who are unpredictable and irrational. And I think that certainly is true of our leader. And I myself I do not know enough about Kim Jong-un as a leader to give him the same characterization. And certainly the media, when they report this, do not attempt to justify their statements that, well, Kim Jong-un is an irrational leader. So we'll get into that. What we need to do is understand the background to him, and then also understand how North Korea looks at things from their historical perspective. Okay, so before I begin, what I want to do is I want to lay out a little bit of, just in brief, a little bit of history as to why the so-called Hermit Kingdom looks at the world the way it does. Now, this term Hermit Kingdom actually is not a term that was originally applied to the current communist government in North Korea. It actually comes from old history, from the imperial period. And if you look at Korea, before the Japan occupied Korea, beginning in 1910, and before that, there was an emperor and a series of dynasties in Korea. And geographically, of course, Korea is a peninsula. So in those days, it enjoyed a measure of isolation from the outside world. Its land border was primarily with China, but that border was demarcated by the Yalu River. So there were mountains there plus the river. So there was that physical barrier. And so the legacy of that is that Korea has remained ethnically very, very pure. So if you go to Korea, 100% of the population is Korean, and there's been almost negligible racial or ethnic mixing with people from the outside. And so that is the real origin of this term, the Hermit Kingdom, in the sense that Korea has been historically isolated from the rest of the world, and it sort of reinforced that isolation by looking inwards. Now, when Japan came in 1910, it was a colonial. It was the beginning of Japanese colonialism in Northeast Asia. In 1932, Japan set up a puppet government, and that sort of initiated the Korean resistance to the Japanese occupation, and that resistance movement was led by Kim Il-sung, the grandfather of Kim Jong-un. And that struggle, of course, continued until 1945 when Japan was defeated. The one thing that Japan did that is very important beyond just ordinary colonialism and beyond the fact that hundreds of thousands of Koreans died during that colonial period is the fact that Japan, what it did is that beginning in 1932, it took control of all of the land. And so when Japanese colonialism was defeated, that land became available, and there was effectively no owner for that land. And the Kim Il-sung and the Korean Workers' Party, which at that point was actually two parties in the North and the South, had an historic decision. What do we do with this land? And they could have decided, okay, we can go back and try to establish land titles and find out whom to give the land back to, or we could take that land, keep it as the land of the state, and implement state ownership and move forward from there. In 1948, the Korean Workers' Party was united. The two sections of the Korean Workers' Party was united, and of course, in 1950, we're often told that, well, what happened in 1950 was that the North, and the forces under Kim Il-sung, then invaded the South, and that sort of, not looking at what happened before that this was a response to elements in the South declaring an independent government and trying to split off from the North, from the government in the North. And so the response of the North was basically to reunify, was to militarily reunify the country. The U.S. enters the war, and the Korean War starts. The Korean War, of course, starts the most devastating period, in terms of physical damage. I mean, this is nothing. This is the destruction of the Second World War pales in comparison to what happened during the Korean War, in the sense that 3 million Koreans die in that war, and the city of Pyongyang and other cities are literally leveled. And actually, I'll get into some. Maybe I should show some of the photos. Okay. So before I go there, because I do have images of some of these things. One of the things that I think we found quite remarkable was to see how in the Olympics, how the two Koreas came together. And of course, this is what we don't often remember, is that this is not entirely new. So there actually have been joint North Korean, South Korean teams before, and so there is a historical yearning of the Korean people for reunification. The fact that we find people in the South who want to embrace the unity of the two Koreas and in the hopes of reunification, and this blue flag is the reunification flag that you saw in the opening and closing ceremonies. And then these are the two teams, South and North, both of them holding the reunification flag. Now, one of the things that as I read the news and the commentary, and the question is asked, why is it that North Korea has suddenly now accepted to have a meeting or has invited President Trump to go have a face-to-face meeting? Why as if North Korea has made an about-face from the testing of nuclear weapons and firing of intercontinental ballistic missiles. And the reason I hear over and over again in the media is that, well, because the U.S.-led sanctions are beginning to bite. And that's not the variable. The sanctions have been in place in one form or another for decades, and we've had some kind of sanctions ever since the end of the Korean War. The big variable here is actually in South Korea, right? So we had a transition in leadership from President Park Geun-hye to this man in the white, Moon Jae-in. He's the new president of South Korea, and he's the one who's really responsible for this opening, for welcoming once again the North Korean team to the Olympics, for talking about reconciliation and opening the doors between North and South that had been closed under the previous president. And his wife is there on his I guess his left or your right. And then behind them, of course, are the two key officials from North Korea. So Kim Yong-nam is the president of the North Korean Parliament, and Kim Yo-jong is the sister of Kim Jong-un. So this is an historic photo, and it's actually, if I go and do an English language search, it's actually hard to find good photos of these events and the reunification that we all saw on television. But it's part of what we face here in this country. Of course, is a constant demonization of communist governments, and you see here that how Stalin is lumped together with other dictators, and Darth Vader thrown in there for good humor. But this is not just simply popular media. This is a professor at Stanford University giving a course on authoritarianism, and North Korea undoubtedly would be lumped into that. And I wanted to. I think I'll skip these. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But there has been so much demonization of North Korea around its testing of ballistic missiles, and this is reminiscent of the West's treatment, and particularly the U.S. Treatment of Iran, right? Because Iran did not ever develop a nuclear weapon, but it was enriching uranium. And it was testing missiles, and every time that it tested a missile, there would be new sanctions, relentlessly increasing sanctions. And meanwhile, countries like India, when India first exploded a nuclear weapon back in 1974, the United States basically gave it a slap on the wrist and said that, okay, we're going to stop military aid or military arms sales for a little while. When Pakistan exploded a nuclear weapon in 1998, it was the same thing. Stop some military arms sales and then move on. And of course, with Israel, it was the unspoken. Israel did not need to test a nuclear weapon in order to have a viable weapon, because Israel is the only country which can actually send its nuclear scientists to Los Alamos and Lawrence Livermore National Labs. They can get the security clearances easily, even though they're dual citizens, and they can take all those test results back to Israel and put them into the design of the Israeli nuclear weapons. And our government does not even acknowledge Israel as a nuclear power. Meanwhile, Iran and North Korea are relentlessly hounded for even testing or developing these kinds of devices. Okay, so let's come back to North Korean history. So the beginning of the Korean War, or what the Koreans call the War for the Fatherland, was the Battle of Sinchon. So the Battle of Sinchon is a town that's a bit north of the demilitarized zone. So this is the border between North and South Korea today, and in that battle, there were U.S. troops, and then there were also fighters from what is today South Korea fighting, and apparently it was a very, very brutal battle that resulted in thousands of civilians, local civilians, dying, and in some of these depictions of that, and these are based upon eyewitness accounts, that people were just buried alive. So something like 3,000 people died here, and it was brutal. And I will tell you that the stories that are told by the North are for the most part true. They've been fudged a little bit, because their account is that the U.S. troops were directly involved in these brutalities, and what we can corroborate is that most of those brutalities were probably done by South Korean fighters, not actually by U.S. troops. But I think that the South does. I will say that North Korea is conscious of how its depiction of history will be used, and it's aimed, of course, constantly at potential reunification. So it does not want to demonize South Koreans in this process, and that's why they have depicted in this way. But the battle itself was a fact of history. Now, during the Korean War, the United States dropped these bombs on Pyongyang and other cities, and we dropped more than 400,000 of these bombs. Pyongyang, for example, as a city, had about 400,000 people in its population. So that means that the United States dropped more than one bomb per person in over the city of Pyongyang. And this is what it looked like. It was carpet bombed. It was devastated to the extent that there was no usable building was left standing in the city. And you could look at this and think this is Hiroshima or Nagasaki, right? So this is the legacy that we left, and why North Korea remains very cautious about dealing with the U.S. and of course the U.S. has been constantly trying to send spies and trying to undermine the government and trying to implement some kind of regime change in North Korea. This is just a few images from my trip there. So this is looking across the demilitarized zone. Okay, so the border is there, and the demilitarized zone is a 2-kilometer zone of demilitarization on either side of that border. So that means I'm sitting on the edge of the demilitarized zone in the north, looking 4 kilometers across through the fog to the South Korean fortifications on the other side. And we have to do some image enhancement in order to see this through the fog. These are the 6 nuclear tests that North Korea has conducted, and showing the relative sizes of the explosions. And the first 5 were clearly fission or atomic bombs, and the last one at 150 kilotons, we do believe was a hydrogen bomb or a fusion device. However, all the Korean ones, which you can see over here on the left, plus the hydrogen bomb that they exploded, is the purple one up above, pale in comparison to the bombs or the explosions that the United States and the Soviet Union have conducted over the years. And of course, they have none of the sophistication of our bombs. And this is just simply a diagram of a W-88 warhead, which has both plutonium and uranium. It's like it's actually 2 bombs in one. A very advanced design. And nobody in the world says anything when even under President Obama, he announced a program to spend $1 trillion over 30 years to upgrade the U.S. nuclear arsenal. And so that would mean a cost of $30 billion a year to upgrade the arsenal that we have today, instead of rolling it back. And the world said very little, okay, or at least very little of consequence. So we need to keep that in perspective. Okay, so North Korea. North Korea is this country that is shown here on this map. The northern border is mostly with China, a little bit of border with Russia, and then the border in the south with South Korea. North Korea has a population of 25 million. South Korea a population of about 50 million. So South Korea is twice the size of North Korea. South Korea is today, amazingly, is considered one of the economic miracles, in the sense that if you go there today, you will think that you are in a first world country. North Korea, on the other hand, is much less developed. But if you look at what we hear in the media, you will probably think that North Korea is a terribly impoverished country. It's in desperate need of aid. People are starving, and it's a real basket case. So I went there to see is there any truth to this? And my mind was really open. I really wanted to know, without prejudice, whether there was any truth to that. And I actually went looking for it. But the first thing, some of these things are for show, but this is an image from the Pyongyang Children's Palace. And I've been to other children's palaces in other socialist countries, such as China. So I've been to for example, the Shanghai Children's Palace. I've been to the Hanoi Children's Palace. I've been to these in the former Soviet Union, in Cuba, and everywhere you see a similar pattern that there is a tremendous emphasis that's placed on children, on giving children the opportunity to do some really amazing things in terms of music, performances, dance, and they do in fact put on some really amazing performances. And I thought about this for a moment to think, well, if it's totally a show, I mean, they're very proud of this. They're very proud of it. All of these countries are very proud of their children's palaces, and I've never seen something that quite equals that in the United States. But if it were totally a show, they would probably put forth somewhat an equal number of boys and girls in this, and the reality is that in all these countries and in North Korea as well, the girls always outnumber the boys by a ratio of something like 20-1, and it suggests to me that it is voluntary, and it's just that girls are naturally gravitate to the fine arts more than boys do, and so it's not something that is dictated by the state. There's some performances with the guijang musical instruments, and another pattern that I see, and I saw this in Vietnam, and I saw this again in North Korea, is that I'll ask you the question. So what is the biggest building in a small town or village?
School.
A school, right? It's a school. And you see this over and over again. And if you go to a small town in the U.S., what's the biggest building? It's probably a Walmart. But this is at the edge. This is in a suburb of a medium-sized city. Kaesong is a city of about 300,000 in the south. North of the border. But the area that it serves is rural. So if you look around this school, it's agricultural fields. So most of these students who are going to this school are students from farms. But this is the school it's a new school because there is population growth here, but you can see the quality, you can see the priority that has been given to education. You can see that that students going on a field trip, that they are properly dressed. Nobody is dressed in tatters. You don't see any evidence of people starving. People enjoy the same kinds of amusements that children or adults would enjoy in the West. This is something completely spontaneous. Okay, this is not something that was staged by the government. So I'm in a park, and there are some Koreans, North Koreans, who have decided that they want to just have some music and dance in the park, and somebody has brought a loudspeaker. So they're playing this music. There are maybe 50 to 70 people dancing, and these are just the people, watching the dancing and spending a nice afternoon in the park. This is just a photo shoot for a marriage. The marriage didn't take place here, but they came to this tourist hotel where I stayed, and they just wanted to have some photos in front of this unusual building. So the traditional marriages continue. There has been no attempt to ban traditional practices of this sort. I might add that North Korea is, according to the Constitution, North Korea has a Constitution, and there is a formal legal guarantee of freedom of religion. Nevertheless, 95% of North Koreans are atheists. Okay, they have chosen that. I mean, of course, it's a process of politicization that has taken place over many decades. Here you have women dressed in traditional dress. They're lined up because there is a parade that is going to take place here on the 70th anniversary of the Korean Workers' Party, and they're going to line the parade route. What do the cities look like? Okay, this is Pyongyang in the early morning. Pyongyang today has a population of a little over 3 million. And when I woke up, I thought, okay, there's all this haze, and this looks like Beijing in the morning, and so it must be terribly polluted. But later on in the day, it clears up, and you see that it's a city full of high rises. And remember, this city was rebuilt from scratch, from 1953 to today. Everything that you see here was built after 1953. All right. Now, how could they do this? So the opportunity was that, okay, the state has taken control of all the land, and we could leave it to individuals. We could say, okay, we'll give you a little bit of aid and go out and rebuild your home. But this is a national catastrophe to have entire cities leveled. And remember that North Korea had no Marshall Plan. Yes, there was aid from the Soviet Union, but there was no Marshall Plan for the reconstruction of North Korea. So this had to be done largely by the efforts of North Koreans. And so Kim Il-sung, with the backing of the party, decided that the only way we're going to do this is if we mobilize nationally with every element of the society, every person, the party's backing, the army gets involved, and that is in fact what happens today is that a lot of the construction today is done by the army. So yes, it is true that if you look up the statistics, it appears that North Korea is one of the most militarized countries on earth, in the sense that it has a standing army of about 1.3 million in a population of 25 million. That means one person in every 20 is a member of the people's army. And so that sounds like an extraordinary level of militarization. But what do these soldiers do most of the time? Most of the time they're not on duty. Most of the time they're back in their home villages or in their hometowns doing productive work. They're part of the society. They're harvesting wheat. They're building roads. They're building new buildings. And so a lot of this construction is actually the product of the labor of the army. If you just look over the landscape, you see housing, you see high-rise housing, you see factories over there in the lower right. In agriculture, of course, there's collectivization. So 80% of agriculture is collective farms. 20% of agriculture is state farms. And so whenever there's activity in the fields, you'll see large numbers of people working together, because the harvesting, all of the agricultural activities are collective. The mechanization is fairly low, but you do see some machinery, such as this winnowing machine, tractors. You see tractors of different ages. The older tractors are mostly are of Soviet origin. The newer ones are Chinese, and North Korea itself does manufacture vehicles, including tractors, buses, cars, which is really amazing if you think about how small the economy is. Infrastructure. So I'm on the main highway in a bus looking out, and there's another bridge there over this river. What we're looking at is a small town which has obviously quite a bit of industrialization. if we look at the North Korean economy, and these are according to United Nations figures, the industry accounts for a little over 20% of the GDP of North Korea. So this is not exactly a basket case, a super underdeveloped country that we would think of. I mean, the contribution of industry to the U.S. economy is around 20% today. So it's not all that different. Yes, the means of production are less developed because of the sanctions that have been imposed by the West. This is a large village with some kind of a state enterprise here. Maybe I'm not sure if it's a chicken farm, but you see that there's organized economic activity even in the villages. Okay, so this is another rural area, village, actually more than one village. But what's unusual about this? If you have been to Asia and you've seen an Asian village, what's unusual about this picture?
Looks like good houses.
Good houses. Those are good houses.
Nice house.
No traffic.
No traffic. Yeah. Well, usually there isn't too much traffic in the rural areas. But the interesting thing is the way that the houses are built, the way that they're arranged, the fact that there's uniformity, and they look like good houses, and then so you see these kind of apartment blocks on the left, and you see what look like tract homes on the right. And that's because, unlike in other Asian countries, whether it's China, Vietnam, India, Thailand, houses are built by individuals in these countries, right? And so you've got the rich person will have a 3-story house built out of concrete. The poor family will have a mud hut, and every house will look different. In North Korea, that's not so. Everybody has the same kind of housing, for a given family size, and all the housing, of course, was built by the state, is owned by the state. The rent is zero. The rent is zero, and you see this. This is true throughout the country, and that's why nobody is homeless. Okay, so in 1953, just after the Korean War, they decided that after the collectivization of the farms, that every farmer would be given a private plot of land. So this decision was made, much earlier than in China. Private plots of land were not given back to farmers until after the Cultural Revolution in China. And so on these private plots of land, people produce a little bit for their own consumption, and many people have a surplus that they can then sell on the open market. So even though the state is involved in the major acquisition and distribution of foods and other commodities, there is a small private free market that comes from these private plots, and this is what you see people selling produce on the sides of the roads and highways. Okay, once again, industry. So there's a considerable component of industry. The biggest element, one of the largest elements of the economy is mining, because if you take the Koreas as a whole, north and south, 90% of the mining is in the north, and it's mostly metallurgical, a lot of metallurgical mining. This is a factory set up by a South Korean company in the industrial zone in Kaesong, and this industrial zone used to employ about 50,000 North Korean workers. There were about 52 South Korean companies, and the previous South Korean president, shut this industrial zone down, And because we have a new president in South Korea, there's hope that this industrial zone will reopen as not only an element of economic cooperation between North and South, but as a stepping stone to further economic cooperation.
What are they making?
No, these are garments.
What?
The garments, clothing.
Oh.
Yeah. Now this is an image that many of you may have seen, and I need to talk about this because this is from the International Space Station, looking at the Korean Peninsula. What you see is the bright lights of Manchuria up on the upper left, South Korea in the lower right. The bright area at the top of South Korea, of course, is Seoul, and Seoul, of course, is a gigantic city. And if you've been to Seoul recently, you'll remember that there are enormous numbers of very, very bright signs, and so there's a tremendous amount of illumination in Seoul. And
Looking south.
in the south, so that's in South Korea, the Republic of Korea, and then this dark zone is North Korea, right? This is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and the one spot that you can see very easily is Pyongyang. So the question is, why is there this difference? So there's the narrative is, if you look at this picture, that North Koreans are living in the dark. They don't have electricity, and now at the ground level, I can look at them and see that I did not experience any kind of, or even see at a distance, any evidence of load shedding. However, Koreans are prepared for load shedding. I mean, load shedding, by the way, is common in other parts of Asia, India, throughout the Middle East. There's load shedding. Load shedding. So load shedding is where because there is not enough electricity supply, so the electric company shuts off the power to neighborhoods. It rotates the outage to different neighborhoods at different times in order to balance the supply and demand.
Coal-fired.
Pardon? Coal-fired. There is some coal-fired. They also have wind and solar. There's hydroelectric. So there are various sources. Yes. But anyway, so at the ground level, I did not see any evidence of that load shedding. But I did notice, as a photographer, and if I'm taking a scene at night, I noticed that I have to turn my camera settings way up because the light is very dim, but it is there. Now, the other thing to note is that on the Chinese side, if you've ever been to a Chinese city, particularly a Chinese city that has a river, is that the building, the external surfaces of the high-rise buildings are illuminated. They're illuminated displays. And I was in Chongqing about a year and a half ago, and I was using my camera to estimate what is the lighting how much lighting is coming about because of the external illumination on the buildings. And it turned out that the external illumination on the buildings was increasing the light output of the city by about 2 orders of magnitude, which is 100-fold. So it's because of the external illumination on buildings and advertising signs that you have the extreme brilliance of South Korea and China, and as a photographer, you would know that a photograph has much less dynamic range than the human eye. And so if we take any kind of if we try to balance the settings, we're going to see this brilliance in the other two, and then an apparent darkness in North Korea. So in summary, the North Korea is not living in the dark, and this is something that we get when we take a photograph of it. Okay, so these are some hydroelectric plants. These are small because the water drop is relatively small, about 50 feet on this river. But here's some amazing things. This is one of the most amazing things that I've ever seen in agriculture. This is the Pyongyang Vegetable Science Institute. It is also a state farm, so it actually is a producing farm, and it consists of a vast array of giant greenhouses. So there are about 150 greenhouses in this complex, and they have this highly developed, very expensive, obviously, a system of irrigation and distribution of fertilizers, and hydroponic gardening. These are beanstalks being grown in this very advanced facility, and it supplies a fraction of the food requirements of the city of Pyongyang. People reading a newspaper in the metro station. This is in the National Library. Now here's one problem is that the internet access is when people go online in Korea, unless they have special privileges, they only can access the internet from within Korea. They cannot access the outside world. This is the Workers' Memorial that was the Workers' Party Memorial that was built on the 50th anniversary of the Korean Workers' Party in 1998, and it has three symbols. You know that most communist countries have the symbols of the hammer and sickle being the symbol of the worker and the peasant, and in North Korea there's the third one, which is the writing brush, which is the symbol of the intellectual. And so it recognizes the contribution of three classes to the revolution: the workers, the peasants, and the intellectuals. Police, so police are, unlike in this country, not all police are armed. And that may come as a surprise, but actually most police, I'll show you, these are armed police, but, they're not heavily armed. They don't have nearly the equipment that our police have. But these are the police who actually patrol the streets, and typically what happens is that one of them is armed and then the other one is not, and this is also a pattern in China. So it changes the whole way that policing is done versus the way it is in the U.S. And this is a part of a military parade, and these are women and the women soldiers. So what I want to do is now come back. So this gives you sort of a glimpse of what North Korea actually looks like, and it comes back to the original question of how do we avert a nuclear confrontation with North Korea. Well, first of all, the opening that is provided is not because Korea is bending under sanctions, but rather because historically, it has always been trying to reach out. It has always been asking for recognition. It has always been saying, why do you exclude us? Why do you refuse to recognize the government of North Korea? And we want to talk. So it was not surprising to me when Rex Tillerson first went made his first trip to Asia, and he sent a message back to President Trump, saying that, we can actually talk to them. It was kind of surprised. We can actually talk to them. And then Trump, gave him the thumbs down. Korean policy, North Korean policy, I think, has been consistent. The variable has been in the U.S. and in particular in South Korea, is that what has been the orientation of the South Korean government towards reconciliation. And so we absolutely, there's never a reason not to sit down and negotiate. As far as why did President Trump accept the invitation, I don't know exactly what is going on in his head, but it could very well be that he's being advised that, well, we need some kind of a breakthrough every president needs to have a legacy. And so every president is looking for some kind of a breakthrough, either as a champion of peace or as a champion of war. So it's either start a war or make peace with someone. And that will define a president's foreign policy legacy. And maybe also a diversion from his current turmoil in the White House. So with that, I will conclude and thank you, and be open to questions.
If you have a question, raise your hand and I'll pass the mic.
If things are so wonderful in North Korea, why are the borders closed? Why is the internet closed? And why are refugees suppressed from leaving the country?
Okay, great question. So, so North Korea has, the reason for its, the closure is twofold, right? It's closure because countries like the United States are, discourage travel. In fact, Trump has just, banned Americans from traveling to North Korea without some good reason. So that is, partly to do with the isolation. The other aspect is that Korea, just like some other communist countries, has been fearful of external subversion, of spies going in there and assassinating their leaders and just creating turmoil. And if you remember what happened after the Russian Revolution was that there were uncounted attempts to subvert the Russian Revolution by the Western powers, and then of course eventually sending in actual forces to try to destabilize the Soviet Union. So North Korea fears this. It fears that, and I don't say that all of this is justified, but their control of the information flow, the total control of the information, is something that is always worrisome. But they see that as a way of because look at the information that's coming from the West. What we know about North Korea is so incorrect, is so far from the truth. So even if you open up the internet and you see what's coming from the West, a lot of it, if it were at least true, it might be okay, right? But if the country is so demonized, it would be very, very demoralizing. I'm not saying that justifies the closure of the internet, but this is their perspective, and this is why they react this way.
Yeah, can you comment on why the Korean War happened, what led to the Korean War, and also why United States is so antagonistic and giving so much negative image of Korea? What is the reason for United States to play that kind of role?
Yeah, thank you. So the Korean War, I mean, there was after 1945, you had the two powers, the United States and the Soviet Union, present in the South and in the North. So there was that confrontation, and so there was always this division within the Korean population between pro-US and pro-Soviet, and with that tension, what actually happened was that in the South, the forces in the South decided to declare a separate country, to declare a government in the South, and the government in the North, that was under the leadership of Kim Il-sung, said that this is not acceptable. We cannot accept the division of Korea. We cannot accept two governments. So they sent forces into the South to try to stop that. And then U.S. forces came in, and that began the Korean War. As to why the United States is so vehemently opposes what the government of North Korea, this is a question that applies to the U.S. attitude to Cuba, the U.S. attitude towards China up to 1973. Why is it that even well? So with all these countries, it's because these countries have systems that are not. Well, first of all, they are communist. These are governments that are under the leadership of a communist party, which we still have that legacy in this country of demonizing anything that is labeled as communist, because it challenges the capitalist system, and those economies are also not open to free investment from the world capitalist system. And even countries that are not under the leadership of communist parties, like Venezuela. But Venezuela has declared its independence. The Venezuelan government, despite all of its shortcomings, has declared its independence of outside influence by saying that we're going to chart our own course. We're going to nationalize certain industries. We're going to, take control of the economy. We're not going to allow unlimited foreign investment. And so what happens there is that the world capitalist system immediately devalues that currency. And so one way that manifests in North Korea is that if you look at the market exchange rate, assuming there could be one, between the North Korean currency and the dollar, the North Korean economy would be devalued to the point where it looks like one of the poorest countries in the world. But that's just because the world capitalist economy deliberately devalues the currency of any country that is not open to investment, that is not open to free market economics. So this is a country which has defied the U.S. wishes in terms of economics as well as politics.
So thank you for your insights into the country. My question relates to the logistics of your travel there, under whose auspices you went, who were the other people on the bus, for instance. And is it possible that you were shown just the most positive sides? I'm sure you couldn't just go off on your own and, do what you wanted to. So I'm just curious about that.
Sure. No, that's an excellent question, because there is truth to that. I mean, North Korea is the only country in the world today where a visitor cannot simply go traveling or walking around wherever one wants to. And so I traveled there. I mean, you can travel there as an individual, but economically, it's more effective to go as a small group, because any kind of foreign visitor who goes there must arrange for the travel in advance and be accompanied. This is through the Korean International Travel Service. They require that you be accompanied by 3 people at all times. So there's a guide, a travel guide, an interpreter, and a driver. So wherever we go, we are accompanied by these 3 people, and they took us to places where, I mean, there were some places where the guide said, don't take photos of this neighborhood, okay? And there was nothing really wrong with it, except that it was a neighborhood of older constructions, and it didn't look quite so nice. And after further discussion, we learned that, okay, what is their sensitivity? Their sensitivity to it is that there are a lot of visitors who come to North Korea and focus on the worst, right? I mean, the people who do that, who go to India and focus on the poverty because the poverty is so remarkable, and then they publish it. And Indians get sensitive about the fact that some people portray India only for its poverty, and North Koreans feel the same way. That why do you only show the bad neighborhoods? Why don't you show the good neighborhoods as well? And so that's the sensitivity. It's not that there's anything fundamentally wrong in that neighborhood, or that they're trying to hide the poverty from you. And I had so another thing that was interesting is that when I entered, we were looking at the entry requirements, and so there's an old law in North Korea that prohibits a visitor. One can get special permission, so some media can sometimes get permission, but that prohibits a visitor from bringing in a lens that is longer than 150 millimeters. And so I had a camera, and I was worried that what's going to happen, because my lens is 300 millimeters, but it doesn't look like a telephoto. It's not a long lens. So I had a friend who was actually, I was accompanied on this trip by a friend who originally is from South Korea, but he's one who has been trying to cut through the disinformation about North Korea, and he actually teaches part-time in Pyongyang as well as in Beijing and Tokyo, and through he assured me, okay, they're not going to worry about your lens. So I managed to bring my lens in, and because of the nature of the camera I have, I can actually get what is effectively 600 millimeters of telephoto out of it, and so I could see things that are actually quite far from the highway, and I could see that things are not fundamentally different as you go away from the main highways. So if there were some things that they were really trying to hide from us that that affected the population, I think we would have seen some evidence of it. And so I'm pretty much convinced that we got a fair picture of what is going on
you say,
in the country.
That Moon Jae-in is more sympathetic to unification with the North.
Mm-hmm.
And I gather the Korean people are on both sides are interested in that. Is there any chance of that happening? What kind of
Yes.
what kind of developments do you see?
Sure. So
coming up?
So if one goes to the south, you hear people talking about an aspiration for reunification. If you go to the north, you hear the same thing, both unofficially and officially. And the official position in North Korea is that reunification is possible, and it's not what you think. So it's not that they necessarily want reunification under the leadership of the North. What they envision, and this is their official position, and there is a precedent for it, and this is the Hong Kong model. So the Hong Kong model is that in 1997, that the British relinquished control of Hong Kong, and it reverted back to China under a system of one country, two systems. And what we're talking about is one country, two systems, both politically and economically. So that you would join the two countries together, still maintain two separate governments in the north and the south for some time, maintain two different economic systems for an indefinite period. So you have plenty of time. You've got an indefinite period to work this out and try to figure out how to gradually integrate the two countries politically and economically, not the sudden transition that happened in Germany. So there is a common vision for reunification.
All right, that's all the time we have for Q&A. Let's thank the... All right.
Can you recap and summarize the bullet points of the topic here, how to avoid a nuclear confrontation between the U.S. and North Korea? So everything that you said, can you just put it in bullet points the important things, just to recap and summarize everything that you just said, because I came in late.
Okay, so the first is that negotiation. We should always be willing to negotiate, and the situation where for 70 years the United States and North Korea have not the presidents of the two countries have not talked, have not said a word with each other, is just unacceptable. The fact that the United States refuses to recognize the government in North Korea is not helpful. I think that if the experience with China is any guide, we should be moving towards establishing diplomatic relations so that to facilitate negotiations, to facilitate discussions, and then the cultural exchanges, sports. These are good openers. As far as the nuclear issue is concerned, North Korea, as far as I can tell, their goal is not to become a nuclear power. As a country of 25 million, they can never compete with the United States or Russia or China. Their goal was to get recognized, and also to deter an attack. So if they can have a peace agreement, because there has never been an actual peace agreement after the Korean War. Remember, there was an armistice. So there was a ceasefire. Officially, it's a ceasefire. And what they want out of this is a peace agreement, a permanent peace, the withdrawal of U.S. forces from South Korea, which are still 28,000, and the unnecessary provocation. If we think about North Korea doing nuclear tests, then what about the United States deploying the THAAD missile defense system in the South, which China also feels threatened by. So what we're talking about is de-escalating the situation, demilitarizing the Korean peninsula, removing U.S. forces, and then North Korea has already said, look, we are willing, and they've said this repeatedly over the years, they've said, we are willing to stop our nuclear program and demilitarize. So we should be sitting at the negotiating table and working on that.
Let's give Dr. Lin a big hand for